Order. Ben Lake to move motion.
Order paper. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity today to discuss the importance of energy efficiency schemes for domestic properties in the most general sense, but more specifically the implementation of Eco4 and Eco Plus schemes. Now, as everybody will be aware, households have had to endure wave after wave of challenges to their budgets in recent months, with each adding to the financial burden of families and eroding living standards. Now, although we've recently received some welcome news that falling wholesale energy prices will begin to feed through to households, it is unlikely that energy bills will return to pre-crisis levels anytime soon. Now, this is a frequently cited statistic, but it bears repeating lest we allow current prices to be normalised. Back in April 2022, the Welsh Government estimated that energy bills of £1,971 would push 45% of Welsh households into fuel poverty. Next month, when Ofgem's price cap kicks back in, it'll still be marginally higher at £2,074. The New Economics Foundation suggests that this pressure will continue into next year, with energy bills in April 2024 estimated to be as high as 70% above pre-crisis or 2021 levels. To put it simply, for too many households, energy prices will continue to be a significant pressure on their budgets for some time to come. Households will also be more vulnerable this coming winter, after being forced to use savings or to take out debt to make it through last winter. Citizen Advice Cymru have seen an increase in people seeking debt advice and report that more people are falling into arrears on essential household bills. The number of people seeking advice on debt relating to energy bills, for example, has more than doubled between May 2021 and May of this year. Now, although this is not the purpose of today's debate, it demonstrates why short-term relief with energy bills is still required, including another round of the alternative fuel payment for off-grid households next winter. But in the long term, the energy crisis has thrown into very sharp relief the urgent need to implement measures to bring down energy bills permanently for both households and businesses. And one solution is to transition to renewable energy sources. Another, and the focus of today's debate, is to introduce comprehensive policies to enhance the energy efficiency of the UK's housing stock. Now, this issue is particularly acute in Wales, given that we have some of the oldest and least efficient housing stock in Western Europe. Data by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities shows that the percentage of dwellings within each local authority are rated EPC level C or above. This data shows that 5 out of the 15 local authorities with the smallest percentage of dwellings rated at EPC level C or above are in Wales, with Gwynedd third from bottom at 23% and my own constituency of Ceredigion only slightly better at 25%. It's perhaps not surprising that Ceredigion does so badly when we consider that 35% of our homes were constructed in the 19th century. It is quite sobering to reflect on the fact that the vast majority of the county's 2050 housing stock has already been built, and that over a third of it was built in the Victorian age. The case for action is therefore quite clear and simple. We need to upgrade the energy efficiency of our housing so as to reduce people's exposure to increased energy costs. Almost a quarter of tenants in the private rental sector live in fuel poverty, with those living in the least efficient homes spending as much as £950 more per year on their energy bills compared to homes rated EPC level C. Now, the UK government has made the case that it is unsustainable to maintain support for households with energy bills indefinitely. By retrofitting, we can mitigate the need for ongoing and future support packages. Indeed, the New Economics Foundation estimated that had all homes in England and Wales been upgraded to EPC level C by October of last year, the energy price guarantee would have cost £3.5 billion less over its first 6 months, and households would have saved on average of £530 over the year. Retrofitting, of course, would also have significant beneficial outcomes for health. We know that living in a cold home can worsen asthma and other respiratory illnesses and increases the risk of heart disease and cardiac events. It can also worsen musculoskeletal conditions such as arthritis, as well as having a detrimental impact on mental health. Wales's Future Generations Commissioner estimated that a comprehensive home retrofitting programme could save the Welsh NHS as much as £4.4 billion by 2040 by tackling some of these health issues. And finally, of course, reducing household energy demand is vital in terms of improving energy security, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, and for realising, of course, our climate targets. A coalition of charities, including Fuel Poverty Action and the Green Alliance, have warned that without action on housing and buildings, there is no plausible path to achieving the 5th carbon budget or meeting the 2030 statutory fuel poverty target. So it's clear that home retrofitting is vitally important, and that action taken now will place the UK in a good position in the future. Now, the UK Government's flagship fuel poverty reduction scheme, the Energy Company Obligation, or ECO, has a key role to play in upgrading our homes to permanently reduce the cost of heating for households and for addressing fuel poverty. ECO has operated since 2013 in several iterations, and up to March of this year had delivered a total of 3.6 million energy efficiency measures in Great Britain. Now, these energy performance improvements delivered have saved low-income customers as much as £17.5 billion in lifetime energy bills and saved the average home some £290. ECO4 is, of course, the 4th iteration of this scheme. It began in April of last year and is planned to run until March 2026. In the past year, installations, though, have dropped quite significantly. All versions of ECO have experienced difficulties in some form or other, but ECO4 has undoubtedly been delivering at a slower rate than previous iterations. Energy suppliers and installers are now warning that structural issues are preventing the scheme from fulfilling its potential, and it is on these issues that I would like to dwell on today. So between April of last year, when ECO4 commenced, and March this year, approximately 45,000 households had received support under the scheme. Given that this is around 10% of the 450,000 households that the scheme is supposed to support over its 4-year lifetime, there is room to be concerned about the pace of the rollout so far. One of the reasons for this may be that the number of measures installed per property during the rollout of ECO4 to date has been much higher than expected, an average of nearly 3.5 measures per property since April 2022, as compared to the 1.8 measures expected in the scheme's final impact assessment. And in the first quarter of 2023, this figure has actually increased to an average number of 4.93 measures per household, Mr Paisley. E.ON Energy estimates that as a result, industry could achieve their overall national bill-saving target by delivering ECO4 to only 215,000 properties against the 450,000 target. Of course, it's not a bad thing that energy efficiency is being significantly improved for those households supported by ECO4, but it does raise a question about the adequacy of the funding in place if, as I'm sure members would agree, ECO4 is to achieve its target of supporting 450,000 households. I shall indeed.
I'm very grateful to, and I agree entirely, and I'm sure that many of us would, that this is primarily a question of funding. And just taking the step back and realising that Shell is directing $5 billion in windfall profits towards their shareholders in the first quarter of this year, there is surely a good case to be made for an emergency windfall tax in order to enable additional work for those other households that will benefit so much.
Ben Lake.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for that important intervention. And Mr Paisley would be unsurprised to hear that I agree with her that this does present an important opportunity to bring about emergency measures. At the end of the day, these companies are making eye-watering amounts of profit at a time when households across the country are struggling. And I think it's very appropriate for us to consider ways of recuperating some of that potential income to put against this important measure. So to achieve the scheme's full potential, therefore, adjustments are required to get it back on track. Now, the first adjustment that's been proposed to me requires the UK Government to look again at ECO4's cost assumptions. These were finalised in April 2022 and do not reflect current market conditions and the escalation in costs caused by labour shortages and increased manufacturing costs. Now, more recent cost assumptions, such as those included in the Great British Insulation Scheme's impact assessment, have reflected these price increases. For example, the fixed assumed cost of installing external solid wall insulation, which comprises some 12% of measures installed under Eco4 to date, increased from £4,200 in 2021 to about £5,000 in 2022, an increase of almost 20%. And meanwhile, on the cost of installing cavity wall insulation for bungalows, as well as detached, semi-detached and end-of-terrace houses, the UK government estimates that this has increased by some 50% and 63%. This is all, of course, without factoring in the inflationary pressures we've seen in 2023 so far. At the start of 2023, insulation and associated material prices have increased significantly, many by close to 10% and some by as much as 35%, compounding similar increases that we saw last year. Now, another aspect of the scheme requiring attention is the minimum requirement threshold. These requirements mean that a household's energy performance certificate must be improved by a particular level. For example, if Band D and E homes are to be eligible for the scheme, it has to be upgraded to at least a Band C, and for Band F and G homes, they must be upgraded to at least a Band D. Now, we should welcome the intent of this requirement. Providing support to the poorest households in the least efficient homes by bringing them up to a significantly higher energy performance rating is an important objective. Nevertheless, the requirement as it currently stands is proving to be a limiting factor in terms of the scheme's delivery. I've spoken to installers and energy suppliers who say that the minimum requirements are too inflexible compared to previous schemes. It's suggested that requirements are making it difficult to find eligible properties, and installers are reporting difficulties proving how higher EPC-banded properties can meet the requirements, such as those particularly on Band D, as well as those on gas properties. E.ON Energy has estimated that around 90% of qualifying fuel-poor households cannot have works delivered to their properties, as either their homes fail to meet the minimum requirement threshold, or it would be economically unviable to upgrade the homes to the levels required to meet them. I would, yes.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he's giving one of the best speeches I've heard in Westminster Hall for a long time, with some good evidence to back up his comments, and I congratulate him on securing the debate. In terms of rural properties, and my constituency, like his constituency, has a very high number of rural homes. Many are reliant on oil-fired central heating and also struggle to fit into the criteria where they would qualify for the type of scheme that the Honourable Member has outlined. And I just wonder, what advice would he have for the government about how we can improve the flexibility in the schemes to make sure that those oil-fired homes can qualify?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for his contribution, and I would say that he's made a very, very important point there. It is a reality that for a very high proportion, if not a majority, of homes in more rural constituencies, they find themselves finding in a great difficulty in accessing this scheme because of the fact that they are not on the mains gas network. Indeed, in my own constituency, some 72% of properties are not connected to the mains gas, and they find themselves struggling uphill, really, to get onto this scheme. I think what the government would do well in this scenario to do is to look again at how, whether it is in EcoFlex, the pathways, whether we can change a little bit of that pathway to allow local authorities greater flexibility to afford support to off-grid properties in particular. That might be a way forward, but it's certainly something that we need to address, because if we don't, I do worry that we'll have a situation that in rural areas, where very often they are an older housing stock, they are less efficient, they will be left behind. So I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for making that very important point. As greater investment is required per property to meet the minimum improvement threshold requirements, the current iteration of the scheme would appear to be more exposed and therefore more vulnerable to inflationary pressures that I mentioned earlier in my remarks. And so we need to look again at the funding of the scheme. And this is something that I'd like to ask the UK Government to look at very carefully. Now, another aspect of Eco4 that is welcome in principle, but is putting pressure on those delivering the scheme, is the flex pathway. This pathway is important. It enables local councils to identify low-income households who are in need of support, but who are unlikely to be eligible under the scheme's standard approach. It also provides an opportunity for local councils to better tailor energy efficiency schemes to their respective areas. And I refer again to the Honourable Gentleman's mark there about rural properties. The issue, however, is that local councils feel that the flex pathway is too onerous, that the information required of them for each application is taking up significant staff time and resources. Indeed, I'm told the level of detail required can make the flex pathway inflexible when considering different local factors. Now, one of these factors is the nature of the housing stock in a particular area. And I've already mentioned that Wales are some of the oldest and least efficient housing stock in Western Europe. I spoke with representatives from Gwynedd Council who expressed concerns that the products available via ECO do not always work well with the design of older houses.
On the point of Gwynedd Council, I'm very grateful. And I would like to mention the Officer Melia Thomas in Gwynedd Council, who's provided advice on this debate to myself and others. And in relation to the EcoFlex programme, another issue in Gwynedd is that related to second homes and the fact that younger people are now priced out of staying in their own homes and that more of them, as non-dependent children, are remaining with their parents. That's increased between 2011 to the 2021 census by 6.8% in Gwynedd. Given that this is artificially inflate, non-dependent children artificially inflate household incomes, this then has a knock-on effect on EcoFlex. So again, these particular rural issues are very much, I think that the government would be worthy of giving due attention to them.
Dan Lake.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and I'd agree with her. I think that the flex pathway offers a real opportunity to allow this policy to be tailored to the specific needs of local areas, so as to improve the delivery, to accelerate the delivery, without really impacting on the broader scheme that the government has implemented. Now, the consequence of rising costs and a perceived inflexibility to the structure of the scheme has combined to have a consequence that supply chains are starting to stutter. And I'm told that many installers are leaving the market. The Installation Assurance Authority warns that there are now fewer than 10,000 people involved in the industry and public-funded retrofitting schemes, whereas in 2012 there were 54,000. Those who've moved away from Eco4 are reluctant to return. If installers continue to leave the market at this rate, it will make it very difficult not just to deliver Eco4, Mr Paisley, but to achieve the level of home retrofitting required to meet our future climate and fuel poverty targets. Now, if these issues are not addressed, thousands of eligible households will miss out on crucial energy-saving measures, meaning that they'll face higher energy bills this winter and beyond. I believe that the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero are considering consulting on the deliverability of elements of Eco4. And can I urge the Minister that if they intend to do so, they should publish the consultation before the summer recess in order to allow sufficient time ahead of April 2024 for industry to adjust accordingly. A failure to do so may mean that even more installers drop out of delivering the scheme due to continued uncertainty. Now, it's not too late to get Eco4 back on track, and a consultation, I'd argue, could play a key part in doing so. But I'd also appreciate it if, in closing, the Minister could address what considerations being given or will be given in a consultation to the following points. Revising Eco4's cost assumptions in line with current supply costs to reflect current market conditions. Widening the eligibility of homes to ensure that more people can benefit from the scheme. Now, this could include increasing the number of fuel-poor households eligible in the private and social rented sector, or it could mean enabling the flex channel to be more responsive to local needs in order to be able to capture more fuel-poor households, such as those not in receipt of means-tested benefits or with medical health conditions. Another suggestion is to investigate the possibility of extending the buyout mechanism so that others beyond energy suppliers can take on obligations and enable local councils perhaps to deliver eco. Another one is making long-term funding available for training to boost the supply chain and to consider measures to boost recruitment and careers in the retrofit energy efficiency industry. Ensuring continuous and open engagements with installers, energy suppliers and other industry and fuel poverty experts to guarantee that the scheme remains on the right track and that UK Government can respond effectively to any future issues that arise. And finally, exploring the possibility of expanding the technologies considered in scope for future iterations of Eco4, such as water control technologies, for example, which can help bring down the cost of energy used to heat water. I would also like to very briefly touch upon Eco Plus, or as it's now known, the Great British Insulation Scheme. I, of course, welcome this scheme, which is designed to support households to install single energy efficiency measures into their homes. But again, there are areas where possible adjustments could vastly help improve delivery. So could the Minister perhaps address in closing what considerations are being given to refining the scheme's targeting to better help fuel-poor households, and in particular, the fact that for the majority of the scheme, households are expected to make a financial contribution to the cost of the measures. I'm concerned that this will effectively make a large proportion of the scheme inaccessible to the lowest income households who cannot afford to make such contributions. And in the context of a cost of living crisis, when disposable income is diminishing across the UK, surely now is a time for the requirement for contributions either to be taken out of the scheme or for the percentage expected to make contributions to be lowered. It would be remiss of me not to mention that I've also heard from constituents who have unfortunately been let down by contractors delivering measures under the Eco4 scheme. Measures installed are now, of course, covered by the UK Government-endorsed quality scheme Trustmark. And whilst I appreciate that incidents of poor delivery may be isolated examples, in those worst-case scenarios where delivery goes horribly wrong, the level of protection and security for households still is inadequate. Is the UK...
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend. One particular issue I'd be grateful if the Minister might be able to address would be the preparedness for providers, for deliverers, to place solar panels on agricultural land and then not to provide a guarantee for damage caused by animals. Now, obviously, this is very convenient and cheaper in terms of access, although there isn't always attention paid to planning requirements. But it would seem that if the convenience is outweighed by the risk to the householder that there will be damage caused by animals that is not covered by a guarantee, I would very much wish the government to address that as, again, a particular rural issue.
Well, again, I thank my honourable friend for raising yet another important point. You know, I think the example that she raises illustrates perhaps the need to improve and strengthen the accountability of the scheme. I know of examples in Ceredigion where households have received or have had measures installed in their homes to a substandard quality, and are finding it almost impossible now to get access to information of redress and also ways of holding the installers to account for the subpar quality of the work. And I think her concerns would be captured by a broader effort to improve the scrutiny and accountability of the scheme. And in that regard, actually, I wonder whether the UK Government might consider ways of improving the oversight of installations, because I do think we need a stronger mechanism by which installers can be held to account. And before closing, Mr Paisley, I'd just like to touch upon the need to incentivise those who are not eligible for the ECO scheme to invest in retrofitting, those now who might have the means to do so for themselves. There are a few measures that come to mind. The first is whether the VAT levied on the point of sale for insulation products, for example, not just on the installation of these products, as well as those that for storage batteries could be looked at again. I appreciate that might be a Treasury matter. But then also, what work might the government undertake to look at options for providing interest-free loans to those who wish to install energy efficiency and low-carbon heating measures? I think that providing access to such support will be even more important in the face of steep interest rate hikes. And finally, another area that deserves a very brief mention when discussing how we can help households to bring down energy bills, as well as expand our renewable capacity, is the question of how to incentivise households to invest in small-scale renewables. I've been contacted by several constituents who are concerned that the reduction in support provided by the feed-in tariffs and now its replacement, the Smart Export Guarantee, has vastly reduced incentives to invest. I'd urge the Government to consider increasing these tariffs that the energy supplies are required to offer homeowners who generate renewable energy. Mr. Chairman, I think I'll draw my remarks to a close, but in doing so, very much look forward to the comments of my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lake. All right, thank you, colleagues, for bobbing. Anyone else wishes to bob, they feel free to do so. I intend to call front benches round about 1:30 approximately, just so as they know. The question is that the House has considered the implementation of ECO4 and ECO+. Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Paisley, and it is a pleasure to serve with you under the chair. And I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Ceredigion for bringing this important debate to this place. Mr. Chairman, we are in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Bills are soaring, wages are not keeping pace with inflation, and people are struggling to make ends meet. We must not forget how harsh last winter was. The energy price cap rose by 54%, and many people were trapped in cold, leaky homes. We cannot allow this to happen again. Households in poorly insulated homes will pay an estimated £13 billion more in energy bills a year. This is because the government has failed to bring these homes up to at least a band C of the Energy Performance Certificate rating. 43,000 homes in Bath have a poor efficiency rating. The government's inaction has meant that some of my constituents are over £1,300 poorer each year. We are also in the middle of a climate emergency. The UK has some of the leakiest homes in Europe. Insulating our homes would push down energy demand and cut our country's greenhouse gas emissions. For the past decade, the Energy Company Obligation, or ECO, as we have already heard this afternoon, these schemes have delivered warmer homes, cheaper bills and greener buildings for millions of vulnerable households. The ECO4 scheme is the latest iteration. It provides grants to fund energy-efficient upgrades to homes. These grants pay for new heating systems like boilers, loft or cavity wall insulations and other measures designed to increase energy efficiency, as we have already heard. However, ECO4 installations are not keeping up with the target to improve 450,000 homes by March 2026. The Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group have shown that by March of this year, only 15,000 homes had been treated. This is just 3% of the overall delivery target. It is a very poor example of the government's inaction to deliver what has been promised. The cost assumptions made in the ECO4 assessments are outdated and unrealistic. The modelling used to set ECO4 targets was based on estimated costs in 2021 prices with an allowance for general inflation over time. Since that assessment was made, inflation has soared. December 2022 saw inflation rise by 9.2% in 12 months. This is more than 3 times what Ofgem projected it to be. The actual cost of delivery far exceeds what Ofgem has accounted for. Loft insulation is an average 430% more expensive. Cavity wall insulation is 322% more expensive, and external wall insulation is 147% more expensive. The government should ensure these costs are taken into account and must match the cost of measures in ECO4 with inflation. So this is a real point that I want to make. What was estimated in 2024 was not taking into account our soaring inflation that we saw over the last year. The criteria for ECO4 also restricts the number of homes which can see improvements. Eligibility for ECO4 requires homes to be increased by at least 2 EPC bands. This makes it hard to find homes which are actually suitable. Feedback from Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group members estimate that 90% of qualifying homes miss out because they are unable to meet minimum requirements under the current scheme. To illustrate my point, E.ON attempted to deliver energy efficiency measures to a 3-bed mid-terrace property in Dagenham. The owners of the property qualified for Eco4 as their home was rated EPC Band E, and they were living in fuel poverty. The package of measures E.ON proposed would have saved the family around £600 a year on their energy bill. The install was rejected because the measures would not have improved the house enough to jump 2 EPC bands. When it comes, Mr. Chair, when it comes to tackling the climate and cost of living crisis, every little helps. Why is the Eco4 scheme making perfection the enemy of the good? The government should relax minimum requirements when all reasonable measures have been installed in an eligible household. This would ensure vulnerable households can still receive much needed support. To tackle both the cost of living and climate crisis, we must improve the energy efficiency of our homes. We must do all we can to ensure the eco schemes benefits as many people as possible and as soon as possible.
Would you give way on that point?
I'm happy to give way.
She's making some excellent points here, and I'm sure in her constituency, as in mine, there are many older properties that are very difficult to convert. So would she agree with me that there needs to be more done to ensure that those people can actually get access to this scheme, because they have a harder measure to get to convert their houses?
Vera Hobhouse.
Well, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we in Bath have got a lot of old leaky homes. They're very beautiful, but they're not particularly energy efficient. But people really are willing and want to do something. And I think the point that's been made today is Eco4 as a scheme doesn't work for for a very large number of households. And if we really want to help vulnerable people and tackle the climate emergency, we must look at how the scheme has been designed and make some improvements to it. And one of the points that I've been trying to make is about the two-jump requirement, which is particularly difficult in old properties. So to conclude, the government must take urgent action to improve Eco4 to protect the most vulnerable from this very from any cold winters coming, but also to make sure that we tackle the climate emergency as soon as possible and as effectively as possible. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you. First of all, can I say what a pleasure it is to speak in this debate, and also to serve under your chairmanship as I have done in the past, and hopefully will do again in the future. I'm aware of, first of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Cardigan for his passion and for his dulcet Welsh tones as well, Mr. Chairman. His accent is one that it seems to flow, unlike my Ulster Scots one, which that probably doesn't come anywhere near it. But can I say, commend him for his passion for this issue. And like him, I have a number of park homes in my area who have been lacking in support during this great energy crisis. He's referred to it before in other debates in the Chamber. I think he may have done this here at an adjournment debate in the Chamber as well, and he's been very, very much to the fore. So I thank him for that. I read with interest, Mr. Chairman, that Ofgem stated back at the end of March that the Great British Insulation Scheme, something which we all know was previously referred to and consulted on by the Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero, under the name ECO Plus, will allow early delivery from the 30th of March 2023 and will run until the 31st of March 2026. On the 5th of April this year, Ofgem published a consultation seeking stakeholder views on proposed administration of the policies set out by the Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero and included in the draft ECO4A order. These included policies exercising their discretion in administering new legislative provisions for the ECO4A or making further improvements to current policies. So that's probably where we are, and that's why the Honourable Gentleman has brought this forward and why it's so important that we understand that better. And we do look to our Minister for a positive response. I look very much to the contributions of the two shadow ministers, and particularly the Honourable Lady for the Labour, who has a real deep understanding of these issues and brings her knowledge and interest to that as well. As we have watched the havoc wreaked by protesters destroying pieces of art, disrupting motorways to the extent of ambulances being stuck and people missing operations and missing their work, the discussion for insulation and necessary improvements has been somewhat lost in the wanton disruption of those who may have a sound message, that's not in doubt, but whose methods don't encourage debate, but instead encourage righteous indignation and, in some cases, Mr. Paisley, causing anger. That's why I'm very grateful that my honourable friend for bringing this discussion back to where it needs to be, in this House, in Westminster Hall, for us to do our jobs and advocate for change, the change that they want, but the change that we want to do the right way in this House, and I want to commend them for that. I read my honourable friend's Politico piece last year, and his word bear repeating this year, and I want to just quote them, if he doesn't mind me doing so. I'm not going to try and embarrass the honourable gentleman, but I just want to, I think those words were very, very salient. And I quote, "We know that households in the least efficient properties have energy bills that are twice the cost of most efficient homes. There's a statutory target to upgrade the energy efficiency of all fuel-poor households to EPC by 2030 and all households to EPC by 2035. Government needs to ensure that it follows through with its existing commitments. Ensuring the EC4 legislation is prioritised in Parliament to maintain installation rates, making swift decisions on minimum energy efficiency standards in the rental sectors, and meeting its manifesto commitment to spend £2.5 billion on the home upgrade grant this Parliament." That's his words in the Politico magazine. They're just as relevant, indeed they're more relevant today in this debate, and I commend them for that. And each one of us fully supports his. And it also tells Mr. Paisley that we do read the magazine, by the way, you know, because some people wonder, do we actually do? But I usually have a look through it, see if I know anybody that's speaking, and then I always catch up. So I did read his article and thank him for that. I support the honourable member in his efforts to hold government to account on this issue, which is in the betterment of all. My parliamentary aide, give an example. I always like to give an example from back home, Mr. Paisley. My parliamentary aide bought a property that had been lying vacant for years, no heating system, and in need of a total refurb. The price was reflected in what they were asking for. And when she looked into insulating that property, she couldn't afford it to do, after all, the new flooring, the new kitchen, new bathroom, the heating, the garden, the front. There's lots and lots of work to do. Now, she's a clever girl, Mr. Paisley. She's the one that writes all my speeches and does all my interventions, so people will know that she's exceptionally clever, and she's very busy as well. But while saying that, she knows in the long run it will save money. But when she was faced with the demands on the joint wage packet coming into the house of her and her husband, that raising a family with 2 children and only the child benefit as a help, I understand reluctantly why she made the choice. It would have been better to have done the insulation. The fact was your pocket doesn't stretch that far. So that's why this debate today is so important, because it's to give that wee bit of a helping hand, that nudge, that assistance towards people. And that's why the debate is important, and why this scheme is so important as well. I believe, Mr. Paisley, that we need to help more people like her to do the right thing. People who get little or no help from the system as a rule, and who work extremely hard. People who stand washing out, and I know that she's very environmentally conscious, washing out their yoghurt pots at 11 p.m. at night after she's writing up the last speech for me, because they want to do the right thing by the environment. I support these people and believe that we must, and we look to government and to the Minister to do the same, starting with fulfilling the obligations they set for themselves and moving on from there. I trust that the Minister is listening to the debate. I know she is. I don't say for 1 minute that she's not. But that we can have a positive answer from that. And that the Minister will reinforce the fact that I don't need to throw orange powder round the streets over the Minister or over my colleagues in Westminster Hall today to make the point. Orange is a good colour, Mr. Paisley, you know that. Yeah, but I still wouldn't do that, and it's not the reason why. But the point I'm making, insulation makes sense. We all agree that. Those who do use different methods to highlight the issues, and those of us in this House today who are using dialogue and communication to try and make change. Let's get the buy-in from the average person to make a sacrifice and prove that we are in it with them. Because I'm here on behalf of my constituents, the honourable gentleman and everyone else has spoken, who will speak afterwards, are here to do the same thing. We can do it, but we need the Minister's help to make that, get it over the line. Thanks so much.
Adam. Mr Farron.
It's a crazy honour to serve under your guidance this afternoon, and huge thanks and congratulations to the Honourable Member for Ceredigion in securing the debate and making an excellent and very detailed opening speech, and to pay tribute to the other contributors to this debate as well, who've spoken well on a really, really important subject. I'm indebted also to Cumbria Action for Sustainability for their work in helping to bring homes up to adequate standard to ensure energy efficiency, lower prices of heating homes, but also, of course, tackling the climate emergency as they do. We've got to be aware of the fact that it's estimated that our homes, the ones that we live in, contribute something like 19% of the greenhouse gases emitted by the United Kingdom. We know that obviously in the last 2 years especially, we have had crushing increases in fuel poverty. Families that were considered themselves maybe comfortable a couple of years ago now find themselves in desperate dire straits, rising mortgage rates and rent rises and the cost of living in general, but the huge increase in fuel and energy costs over this last couple of years has rendered many homes in a situation where they simply cannot see where to turn. And therefore, the need for a scheme that delivers warmer, greener, cheaper homes to run has never been greater. And yet the number of UK energy efficiency installations peaked in this country at 2.3 million in 2012. And in the decade that's following, we've got down to a miserable 100,000 a year. So the government's much vaunted Green Homes Grant, which was meant to deliver energy efficiency for 1 million homes, in the end only did so for 60,000. Eco4, therefore, can and must do much better. In our county of Cumbria, as we hear other members saying very similar things, we face specific problems that make our challenge much greater. A much larger proportion of solid wall properties, a much larger proportion of off-grid homes, and a much larger proportion of homes that are listed or in conservation areas. There are lots of positive things to say about Eco4. Fundamentally, its ambition in raising energy performance certificate points, and also in its fabric first policy, the aim to ensure that insulation happens before the installation of new and hopefully better energy sources, heat sources. Positive in principle, but in practice not entirely being followed. Households, and especially those in Cumbria who can least afford it, are suffering because the detail is not being got right. So a few points. The funds provided to those installing insulation just don't meet the cost, especially for single-wall properties. We've heard from others. I think we're right in saying that on average there's been a 77% increase in the cost of the materials. And so insulation isn't happening because companies simply can't afford to do it. And it is that much more expensive to do that work on single-wall properties, the properties that most need it. It's also worth bearing in mind that to insulate a single-wall property entails a further risk, a risk of the build-up of moisture between the wall itself and the insulating layer, which can lead to the build-up of mould, having a huge impact on human health and building quality in the months and years that follow. Now, there are answers, I'm told, by people who advise me on such matters. You can use corkboard or timber fibre board or insulating lime render, which is especially suitable for lakeland properties in terms of the aesthetics as well as its efficacy. But frustratingly, none of these materials are available through the Eco4 scheme, which goes to explain why relatively small numbers of people are going to take advantage of it. Eco4 is a more complex scheme, as the Honourable Member for Ceredigion rightly pointed out. There are many good reasons why that might be the case, but one of the consequences is the energy companies themselves and local authorities have been reluctant to engage as providers. What does that mean? It means the only people providing the schemes through the work through Eco4 will be independent and private providers, some of whom will be very good, some of whom will not be very good, and private householders almost certainly including the likes of me, not always the best judges between which is which, and that will have an impact upon the quality of the work and whether indeed taxpayers' money gets spent wisely. It's worth bearing in mind that for this reason also, that while Cumbrian contractors have been used to deliver some of the work, Cumbria Action for Sustainability tell us that there have been no Cumbrian-based companies offering Eco4 measures. I mentioned earlier on the issue about listed properties and those in conservation areas. Residents of Westmoreland living in such properties tell us that when they explain that their home is listed or in a conservation area, suppliers almost instantly, very politely I hope, tell them that they're not interested. There's no way they can make it add up. There's no way they can make the scheme pay. Fuel poverty amongst residents of private rented properties, as has already been mentioned, is the worst of all. In a community like mine, we see many people who, the average income in my constituency is about a 12th the average house price. We have a council house waiting list of 5,000 or 6,000. We have inadequate numbers of affordable housing. The only way there is any workforce available of a working age population in my constituency is because of the private rented sector. That is also mixed, shall we say, in its quality. And Cumbria Action for Sustainability are unaware of a single private landlord in Cumbria who has pursued Eco4 as things stand. Insulation and the warmth and the energy efficiency of any property stands and falls on its windows. Of course, Eco4 allows for funds to replace single glazing, but will not allow funds to replace double glazing. Even if that double glazing is 50 years old, past its use-by date, cracked and faulty. That appears to be a blind spot that I really hope that we will look at and act on quickly. We've already heard that Eco4 doesn't cover the real costs of especially single-wall property insulation. But that is especially so for floor insulations above garages, where there are rightly fire safety requirements, making the work more expensive. And costs that the scheme doesn't cover means schemes that don't come into practice, and the people who suffer are those who are left with a home that is too expensive to run and cold. Again, Cumbria Action for Sustainability and providers point out that a major reason why the Green Homes Grant failed was the lack of a large enough skilled workforce, especially with regard to the work needed for solid wall housing. And yet the situation is no better now. Retrofitting, for example, still doesn't feature in most of the relevant training schemes. So Eco4 is in principle better than its predecessors. But if it doesn't work in practice, people in Cumbria and elsewhere in our country will suffer. I'm going to argue that we're the most beautiful bit of the country, but we're often the coldest and the wettest too, with extremes of wealth and poverty, making it very hard for many of my constituents to be able to cope with the financial costs as well as the deprivations that go with it, with over a third of our housing stock being single-walled property. So Cumbria needs the government to get Eco4 right. I hope it will hear the practical and constructive suggestions made by colleagues on all sides in this debate and act duly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Paisley. It's nice to see you in the chair this afternoon, and I also commend the member for Ceredigion for securing and leading the debate for us today. I'm surprised I got that right, Ben, I'll be honest. Mr Chairman, there is two issues that require our immediate attention and decisive action: the soaring cost of living crisis and the importance of energy efficiency support. In light of that, it is deeply concerning that while we face these crises, the government choose to cut taxes on bankers. Such a decision is abhorrent, especially when it is the ordinary everyday citizens who bear the brunt of an escalating cost of living crisis, much of that due to rising energy costs. Inflation continues to hit those on the lowest incomes most severely, exacerbating their ongoing struggle to make ends meet. The Prime Minister pledged, of course, to cut inflation by half. However, it is evident that the government is struggling to meet this pledge and now aims to reduce public sector pay to compensate. And we now know, after learning today, that the leader of the Labour Party also refused to back public sector pay rises. A misguided approach, in our opinion, that will only further burden those who are already struggling. Research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation paints a distressing picture, colleagues, revealing that 7 million households have gone without essentials such as food, heating or basic toiletries due to the cost of living crisis. It is all of our responsibility to provide support and relief to these individuals and families who are enduring such hardships. So considering all of that, all of the other parts playing into the crisis, it is vital that we do not withdraw or cancel energy efficiency support for those in need. Energy efficiency measures such as Eco4 and Eco Plus play a crucial role in achieving our net zero targets and combating climate change. In 2019, a report from the Energy Committee praised the Scottish Government as being, quote, leagues ahead of the UK Government in terms of energy efficiency, and we continue to deliver on this front. And we all know, colleagues, our planet is facing unprecedented challenges with soaring sea temperatures, and the need for action is now urgent. It is disheartening to note that the previous Base Secretary and the disgraced former Prime Minister Boris Johnson blocked plans for a public information campaign on energy efficiency. How much could consumers have saved if they had received the necessary information and support? Because so many of our constituents do not know that the help and the support is out there in the form of these schemes. In the Scottish Government, they have taken proactive steps towards energy efficiency, committed to investing at least £1.8 billion in heat and energy efficiency over the course of this Scottish Parliament. Through existing programmes, we have already supported over 150,000 households in or at risk of fuel poverty, including those in our rural and island communities. Our Home Energy Scotland grant and loan scheme offers grant funding of up to £7,500 for heat pumps, with an additional £7,500 made available as an optional interest-free loan. Moreover, we have provided an uplift of £1,500 to both the heat pump and energy efficiency grants for rural and island communities, recognising the specific challenges faced by these island communities. Beyond the immediate measures, we must also recognise the urgent need to change the way we use our energy. As oil and gas production naturally declines, there is a tremendous opportunity for growth in low-carbon energy production. By 2050, it is projected that low-carbon energy jobs could increase to 77,000, delivering an increase of 7,000 jobs across the energy production sector. The draft Energy Strategy and Just Transition Plan put forth by the Scottish Government outlines the necessary actions for the UK Government to collaborate with us to achieve Scotland's full energy potential. To facilitate this transaction, the Scottish Government, led by the SNP, is already investing in the sector's net zero transformation. Our expanded £75 million transition fund and the £100 million Green Jobs Fund, along with the £500 million in the Just Transition Fund, will support regions like the North East and Moray in becoming centres of excellence for the just transition to a net zero economy. This stands in stark contrast to other parties that have historically bled the North East of Scotland dry and left the region on the proverbial scrap heap. Renewable energy presents a significant economic opportunity for Scotland. This just energy transition will deliver a net gain in jobs across the energy production sector, and the Scottish Government has taken decisive action, but we are constrained by the limitations imposed by Westminster's grip on the purse strings. It's time for the UK Government to recognise this and recognise the importance of energy efficiency, collaborate with us and our colleagues in the Scottish Government and provide the necessary support to achieve our shared goals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Bonner. Opposition spokesperson, Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Paisley. A pleasure to see you in the chair, as always, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Ceredigion on securing this debate. I think what we've heard from all the members that have spoken so far is just how important it is for the government to look at some of the complexities and how much, I mean, obviously I represent a predominantly urban constituency, and we've heard from people that by and large represent rural constituencies. And each area will have different problems depending on the housing stock, depending on the availability of skills and so on. But it is the government's job to try to iron those out, and I think that's why it's so important that we've had a debate today where people can put on the record some of the issues that they found. In terms of, starting with the broad brush issues, though, as we look at retrofitting. People have set out the context very well, that it's the energy bills crisis, the rise in bills that has really brought home to people, I think, just how much energy they will be losing through having poorly insulated homes, you know, literally energy going through the roof, and how we could reduce bills, but also reduce our emissions if we had homes that met EPC C standard. I would say, you know, this is about retrofitting existing homes, but the fact that the government did have a pledge to introduce zero carbon new homes and then dropped that pledge. I've seen estimates like well over 1 million homes being built since then that do not meet EPC C standard. So given that we face such a massive task in retrofitting existing housing stock, it seems to me absolutely ludicrous that we are not insisting that new build actually meet a certain standard, because they will be the retrofitting jobs that, you know, we will have to retrofit them not too far down the line. On the skills side, and I've just come from Energy Bill Committee, where we're very much talking about the how do you ensure that you have the skills for a just transition. And I think particularly because this sort of work tends to be carried out by SMEs, sole traders, it's not like there's one big company that will deliver on this. They need certainty, so they know that this is a line of work into which they can move, that there will be jobs for the foreseeable future. And what we've seen in the past with some of the schemes, you know, stopping and starting, lack of consumer confidence because of the way some of the earlier schemes floundered, we are not going to get people moving into those jobs, particularly when we know that we already have labour shortages in some of those sectors like construction, plumbers, electricians. You know, it can be quite difficult to get people even to do the traditional jobs, let alone move into this area. So that is something, again, you know, in terms of stability that we need to address. It was mentioned about the need for advice for consumers, and I said about consumer confidence. I think that is really important in that, I said, partly based on previous experience, but this is about going into people's homes. This is uprooting, you know, their domestic lives and potentially putting them at risk of having to pay quite a lot of money as well. And we saw again with some of the cowboy operators with the earlier schemes, where either the work wasn't being done to the standard they were expecting it to be, or that suddenly they were being told that they needed extra. Yeah.
It seems evident to me that because many of the people who will qualify for support with these schemes will be of essence vulnerable, that unless there is protection built in for them, that they are vulnerable as well to not being able to deal when the work is not done to sufficient standard, which of course as MPs is what we will hear about, but that I would expect government to have built this into the schemes in the first instance because of the nature of the people they're trying to support.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case, and I remember, you know, I've been in this place for 18 years now, and I remember earlier on having to deal with a lot of that casework from people that just being ripped off, basically, to put it mildly, and were really struggling to deal with the bureaucracy around, you know, whether they were going to be able to get public funding for things, whether they had to pay the people that were literally on their doorstep asking for money. So to turn more specifically to where we are now, we know that I would say that the Eco Scheme was well-intentioned and welcome, but it is not working. We know that at the moment the UK has the least energy-efficient housing in Europe, and home insulation rates have plummeted. There's been a lot of statistics bandied around. My numbers are slightly different, I think, over different time periods. But you know, in 2013, we know that the Coalition cut energy efficiency programmes, and after that, insulation rates fell by 92% in 2013, and that's what I was going back to, that period when we knew that the market just sort of crashed and set us back almost like a decade to where we are now. Last year, only 159,699 eco measures were installed in low-income and fuel-poor homes, which was 59% down from the 393,706 in 2021. There is a substantial gap, as we've heard, between government insulation targets and delivery where Eco4 is concerned. An analysis from E.ON Energy suggests that as at December 2022, the industry had completed around 11% of the obligation compared to an expected 19%. At the same point during the Eco3 scheme, we estimate the industry had completed 29%. And this delay will have consequences. A report from WWF and Scottish Power warns that the government is on track to insulate just 1/6 of the homes needed to meet its target of reducing energy consumption by 15% by 2030. And I've spoken to various businesses within the retrofit industry who fear the same mistakes are being made. Nigel Donoghue, Chief Exec at the Insulation Assurance Authority, has said the transition to Eco4 was really poorly managed, despite conversations with the government about not allowing this to happen to the industry again. There is no getting away from the fact that the scheme is really struggling. There are, I think, two major issues delaying delivery. The first is limitations on scoring. E.ON estimates that up to 90% of the properties eligible for Eco4 will not receive the support they desperately need because their homes do not meet the minimum improvement requirements. The goalposts are being moved on from what is required for a property to meet the SAP score, so vulnerable fuel-poor households are ruled ineligible and miss out. The second is on costs. Funding assumptions under Eco4 are significantly lower than actual installation costs, and rising inflation has escalated costs in the supply chain much further. We know that with current inflation rates and also with the skill shortages, those costs are likely to be increasing incrementally, almost like by the week. And this is something that I'm not convinced that the government has actually taken into account. Loft insulation, for example, is currently 430% more expensive to deliver than the government estimate, while cavity wall insulation is 372% more expensive. Yeah, these clearly aren't small discrepancies, and they have to be recognised in the Eco4 scheme. DESNZ, the department, acknowledged the increased costs when consulting for the Eco Plus scheme back in December, but Eco4 hasn't been aligned. There's also, and I think I mentioned before, this problem with gaps between schemes causing confusion and uptake to drop. There was a 4-month gap before Eco4. I think actually between earlier programmes, at one point there was an 18-month scheme, and certainly on the skills front, I've been told that had a major impact. We can't allow the same to happen with Eco Plus. There needs to be continuity. I've also spoken to a housing association boss who says generally he thinks the scheme's working okay, but timescales, bureaucracy are a big problem. Low levels of contribution to Band D homes means installers, I can't read my own writing here, installers and energy companies are less likely to take them on. He would like to focus on making sure that installers are PAS compliant. In the long term, it means that people will trust retrofitting more. But at the moment, it's very bureaucratic. He cites a case where a 115-page form was needed to fit in one case of loft insulation that actually only took an hour to install the loft insulation. I don't know how long it takes to fill out a 115-page form, but I'd imagine that was considerably longer. And then he says, as with other schemes like HUG, the focus on specific measures rather than letting retrofitting coordinators decide what is best sometimes mean they can't offer support for some houses. So to conclude, Mr Paisley, it would be remiss of me not to mention how well Bristol is doing in terms of retrofitting homes with its City Leap programme. The 3CI website actually has a really good account of what we're doing. One of our ambitions, for example, is to get all social housing up to EPCC by 2030. It's a very innovative arrangement with private sector finance. And on Labour's front, we are committed under a Green Prosperity Plan to spend £6 billion per year to retrofit 19 million homes within a decade to EPCC level, save families an average of £1,000 a year off their energy bills, create over 206,000 new full-time equivalent jobs, and would cut national gas imports by up to 15%. But to be able to do that, we very much hope, I hope that in a year's time, or just over a year's time, whenever the election's called, we are ready to start work on this. But it would be really good if the government addressed some of these underlying issues, particularly on the skills gap and ensuring there's that continuity of supply, and listen to what members had to say here today so that we are really ready to hit the ground running. And even if we don't win the next election, I'm sure the Minister would hope that things would be in a better place so that we can steam ahead with this programme.
Thank you. Minister Amanda Soloway.
Thank you, Mr Paisley. It's a great pleasure to be here under your chairmanship. And let me first of all congratulate the member for Ceredigion for this incredible debate. And it has been really important. And I'd like to thank all of those who have contributed. You may know, Mr Chair, this is not in my portfolio. However, I am here to represent and will take away anything that I'm unable to answer today. So I welcome all the members' contributions. It really has been incredibly helpful. And especially I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for the suggestions that he has been making and also other suggestions that we've heard throughout the day, throughout this debate. And one of the things I think that we really do need to apply within all of this is common sense. And a lot of the suggestions that I've been hearing today have been based on common sense. So I would like to thank all the members for that. I also just wanted to, at the start, even though it isn't relevant to this particular debate, talk about the energy costs that really do play on my mind as Minister for Consumers and Affordability. And there are many schemes that I clearly could go over today, though, as I say, it isn't relevant. However, I just wanted to allude to, as many honourable members have mentioned, that we must encourage all consumers to make sure that they get all of their benefits. And that is one of the things that I very strongly, and thank the honourable member for bringing that up. And please make sure that we, as members of Parliament, also try and encourage people to do that. The energy company, the energy company obligation, the ECO, is the government's most successful domestic energy efficiency scheme in Great Britain. And it obligates larger energy suppliers to deliver bill savings for households by installing energy efficiency measures. And since it began in 2013, it has delivered 3.6 million measures in over 2.4 million properties, which is over 9% of British households, and we have had eco measures installed. And this has meant that over £19 billion worth of bill savings for low-income and vulnerable households over the lifetime measures have been installed. And indeed, as the Honourable Member may know, his constituency, over 17% of households have received eco measures over the last decade. Eco 4 was introduced last year and runs until March 2026. And it has continued to support low-income and vulnerable households, whilst also increasing focus on the least efficient properties and on fuel poverty. To be eligible, households either have to be in receipt of means-tested benefits, live in social housing, or be referred by their local authority or energy supplier. And for the first time, part of the overall target has been met by upgrading the equivalent of 150,000 of the worst performing homes and energy performing certificate ratings of E, F or G, those most likely to be in the deepest fuel poverty. Also, for the first time, we set a minimum requirement for energy efficient improvements, depending on a home's energy efficiency rating. This means, Mr Chair, that the more households receiving help, that means that more of the households receiving help will be brought out of fuel poverty permanently. We estimate the current energy bills prices households benefiting from Eco4 will reduce their annual energy bills by an average of over £600 per household. And delivery under Eco4 commenced last April with around 130,000 measures delivered to over 43,000 low-income households. And this scheme data shows a gradual increase in delivery, and recent reporting from the supply chain indicates that it has continued to increase through May and June. I'm sure that the Honourable Member will be delighted to hear that Ceredigion continues to benefit disproportionately, and over 1% of all measures installed under Eco4 have been in his constituency. This success is partly due to the explicit incentive within the scheme to treat off-grid rural homes in Wales and Scotland. And it is also thanks to the EcoFlex provision, which allows up to 50% of the overall obligation to be met by treating homes referred by their local authority or devolved administration. Ceredigion is one of the leaders in that part of the scheme. Nevertheless, I would like to give my assurance that we are not complacent. We continue to monitor delivery closely, working with local authorities, energy suppliers and devolved administrations to share EcoFlex best practice
and remove administrative barriers where possible. Ofgem have recently republished guidance which should make EcoFlex process easier. And one of the things that we're doing is considering, as has been questioned, how the whole scheme can be amended. We also recognise that costs have increased since developed Eco4, and as the Honourable Member has explained, there are challenges in meeting the minimum improvement requirement in certain homes. Therefore, we're considering whether changes to the policy are desirable and analysing their impact. For example, we will need to examine the consequences of relaxing the minimum requirement would have on our fuel poverty targets, given the imperative of proving homes to band C. To make changes to Eco4 will require a public consultation and amendments to affirmative regulations, so any changes that we decide to make will be well informed by external stakeholders. And on his specific point about expanding the list of technologies, the primary legislation which enables Eco4 and GBIS limits technologies to those which reduce space heating costs. So whilst we are open to expanding the eligible technologies in the future, it would require a change in primary powers. Beyond Eco4 and in response to persistently high energy prices, we have extended the help available through a new eco-energy efficiency scheme, the Great British Insulation Scheme, which many members have mentioned. Previously consulted on as Eco Plus, it will boost support for those on the lowest incomes and most vulnerable, as well as extending help to a wider pool of households also challenged by high energy bills. Eco4 and the Great British Insulation Scheme are a major expansion of the government's action on energy efficiency. The predecessor, Eco3 scheme, was worth £640 million annually, and total eco funding has now reached £1.3 billion per year to March 2026. In April 2026, we estimate the GB Insulation Scheme will have delivered around 376,000 measures to around 300,000 households, and will help households cut heating bills by an average of around £300 to £400 per year. These schemes also create continuity for the supply chain. To further facilitate supply chain growth, government has increased funding for training schemes, as many, again, members have mentioned. And the Department's £9.2 million Home Decarbonisation Skills Training Competition, launched in September 2022, has awarded grant funding to 19 training providers in England to deliver subsidised training in energy efficiency, building retrofit and low-carbon heating sectors. And this training will deliver an estimated 9,000 training opportunities to the building retrofit, energy efficiency and heat pump sectors through to summer 2023. This includes accredited training to qualify standard installers and retrofit coordinators. Alongside the energy efficiency upgrades we're making through the Great British Insulation Scheme and Eco4, the government is also investing £6.6 billion over this Parliament on clean heat and energy efficiency, in reducing our reliance on fossil fuel heating, and in addition £6.6 billion of new government funding will be made available from 2025 to 2028. We've heard mention, Mr Chair, around consumers at the heart of all of everything that we're doing. And I also wanted to give my assurance that one of the things we are doing is reaching out to stakeholders. And I know members have also mentioned places like Citizens Advice Bureau, where clearly it's important that we are talking to people around the cost of living, but also what we are doing for our ongoing support. And the government investment I have listed, as well as specific investment in building a market for green finance, has meant that a range of green financing options are already available to owner-occupiers and private landlords from high street lenders. And these include things like green mortgages and additional borrowing facilities or cashback offers to homeowners undertaking energy retrofit. Some energy suppliers also offer net 0% finance for certain energy efficient products. Improving the energy efficiency of our homes is the best long-term solution to reducing energy bills and tackling fuel poverty. And Eco4 and the GB Insulation Scheme will support this while also helping to protect our nation's energy and support our net zero target. It has also been talked about a comparative assessment made between cost assumptions for the Eco4 scheme and those set out in the Great British Insulation Scheme consultation. And we are monitoring Eco4 delivery against the current cost assumptions and will consider changes if necessary. Changing the cost assumptions may require either a change of the overall energy bill reduction target, the estimated funding scheme policy details, or a combination of all three. And such changes will require public consultation and regulatory change. There are many more areas that I could discuss, but I would like to again thank the Honourable Member for securing this incredibly important debate. I look forward to continuing to engage on this matter going forward, and also with all eco stakeholders on these matters to ensure that schemes continue to help fuel poor households, support jobs and to deliver value for consumers.
Thank you, Minister Soloway. Mr Lake, you can have a couple of minutes to wind.
Thank you very much, Mr Paisley, and may I begin by just thanking all those who contributed to the debate this afternoon. I think we had a very detailed and useful debate, and as well as some of the practical concerns and challenges, we also had a chance to discuss some of the broader, sort of deeper tensions within various aspects of the policy and how changes to one aspect might have a detrimental or an unintended impact on another aspect. So I'm very grateful to all colleagues. If I can briefly just thank those who made speeches this afternoon, Mr Paisley, to the honourable members for Bath, for Strangford, for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. In addition then to my honourable friend from Courtbridge, Kristen Ann Bellshill, the member from Bristol East, and of course the Minister, as well as those who made interventions. I think it was a good debate with a consensus that this is a very important objective, a policy that will deliver a great deal of good for those household budgets as they face ever-increasing pressures on their household finances. And in finishing and having the last word, as it were, just to kind of say that I'm very pleased to hear that the government is monitoring the situation, in particular the cost assumptions, because I think that would be something that is broadly welcomed by those who are responsible for installing some of these measures. So thank you very much,
Mr Lake. The question is that the House has considered the implementation of Eco4 and Eco Plus. As many as are of the opinion say aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
Thank you very much.